Good evening. I'm Susan Miller, and first of all, I'd like to thank JCSC and the League for hosting this event this evening here at Jefferson Academy. It's great to be with people who are passionate about choice for parents and families. I'd like to briefly tell you about my background and why I'm running for the Jeffco School Board. I began my career in finance, where I rated municipal bonds. I moved to banking, and today I work for a firm that advises school districts across the country on enrollment, facility planning, financing, and project management. But my most important job is as a mom. I have 4 children navigate Jeffco schools, including Kiffin Elementary, Creighton and Evergreen Middle Schools, and Lakewood and Wheatridge High Schools. And like many parents, I volunteered. I've chaired the Wheatridge High School Accountability Committee and continue to serve on that committee today. I was president of its PTSA for a number of years and served on numerous district committees. For 6 years, I was also president of the Jefferson Association for Gifted Children, where we engaged in nonpartisan, evidence-based advocacy for gifted and exceptional special ed children at the local and state level. And there are 3 reasons I'm running for school board, but I'd like to discuss just one at the moment. Let me ask you all a question. How many of you worry about your children's future in the 21st century economy? Today, every parent I know is worried about this, and Jeffco's achievement results clearly show we need to do a better job. Let me cite you just a few pieces of evidence. They say that up to 3rd grade, students are learning to read, and after that, they are reading to learn. But in Jeffco, in the 2019 CMAS, 75% of Jeffco 3rd graders eligible for free and reduced didn't meet state literacy. If you can't read well, it's hard to keep up. It's extremely hard for teachers to change the task. We have to do better, and I've seen it done here at many schools in Jefferson County. If you elect me, I'll have a laser focus on improving achievement results for all kids for their future in the 21st century economy. That's why I'm running for the school board, and that's why I'm asking for your vote on November 5th. Thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, as a board member, you're not really able to make the change yourself. It has to be from a governance perspective and working together on a board and holding our superintendent and his team accountable for goals and objectives that are set. So for example, we have a challenge before us where 55% of all of our children are not on reading level in 3rd grade. 75% of those are free and reduced lunch, and about 44% of our children that are non-free and reduced are not on grade level. And we've had the READ Act come in place, and we've had lots of interventions take place, but we're still not hitting the bar. So I think that is one area that we would set as a governing board to the superintendent and his team that says, this must be achieved within the next number of years. It's up to you how you do it. It's up to you how you do your interventions and direct the dollars, and we'll support you in that way, but we will hold you and your team accountable. And reading is the critical foundation in order to be able to do your maths, in order to do your sciences, and on into different pathways. So that would be my critical focus.
I just want to say my background is working at title schools. I live in the Mulholland area. Free and reduced population there is about 97% male. That's an area where my kids went to school, where I taught, taught was the assistant principal and principal. So I have a lot of background in, I guess we could say in quotes, underachieving schools. I just want to initially say the urgency is there all the time. You would be amazed, I think, if you saw how much work is done around data analysis within a school, that continuous school improvement piece, within the school itself, within the classroom itself. That's pretty much all I did for a really long time, was data analysis, to see where we can make positive steps in making sure our kids can read and do math. I think exactly what Susan said. I think it's incumbent, and I think the district has already started to kind of work with a continuous improvement cycle to identify the root causes of the lower scores and really work towards having strategies to address them, and then to look to see how it worked through time. That's the accountability piece. So that continuous learning cycle occurs at the district level, certainly at the school level, and definitely at the teaching level itself.
5 or 6 years, everybody's been talking, we have this $1 billion budget, and now it's a little bit more with 5A, 5B coming in, 5B being those dollars that are spent on capital, so that's not really dollars that we can have any impact on in terms of using on an annual basis. It's the $5A, the extra meal dollars that we have received. And when we look at the budget, it's almost up to over $1 billion now, about $1.2 billion. And we had $43 million come in, additional dollars this year from all the revenues and kiddos. And we're spending actually $62 million additional funding. So we're taking money that carried forward from last year and bringing it into this year's budget. And we're not really paying our bus drivers, we're not paying for substitutes, we are directing our dollars in a way that is not honoring, I think what Stephanie was saying before, is how are we honoring all those people that work for us. In addition, we are compounding the work on our teachers, and we're asking them to do one more thing, take care of the one-to-one Chromebooks, take care of your children. You have more special needs coming in, you have more social emotional learning, and they're being compounded to just pick up one more thing on their plate, and we're not taking anything away. And we're not giving them the necessary tools that they are in need of. So I think we need to be talking about really the comprehensive budget, how we're spending money, what are our values, what are investments, and what are the return on investments that we're making. And if we have to pivot, we pivot. But we just don't keep going in the same path without a check and balance on ourselves.
And I mean, certainly there's a process that community members, parents can get involved with around budget in the district. For an example, last year there was a new safety task force that convened and really worked on some things that can happen in schools to help with safety issues. And those issues were physical safety, but also around the social emotional needs of our kids. I'm happy to say that the budget includes some of the recommendations. Part of the mill levy money is to help with having social emotional learning specialists in schools. That's the kind of thing, for me, when I was a teacher, that would be really helpful and was really helpful. I was fortunate to be in schools that had a lot of challenges, but on the other hand, had a lot of other social emotional help there. We had Jefferson Center for Mental Health therapists on site, we had a full-time social worker. Those are the things that were helpful. So I really do see there is a process. It is a huge budget. It's hard to get your hands around it. We're the 37th biggest district in the United States. It's a big budget. I think the best that we can do, well, what I would like to happen is really see how we translate those budget decisions to school sites. I would want to know as a parent, we have this huge budget. How does it make sense for my school? Then I'll have a better idea of if it's working, if it's equitable, in my opinion. Thank you.
To musical, to the Pomonas, to Green Mountain Pathways. You also have, I think, a consideration for parents that are driving. That's the challenge for all of us that chose to send our child to a different school that was not our neighborhood school. And I think those of us that have driven for years and years and years to take our children to the school that we think is going to be the best fit, that's a luxury for us and for our children. It doesn't necessarily ripple across everybody in our communities. And so I think the big challenge that we had was how do people find out about choices? And I think Enroll Jeffco that was rolled out has been a great advantage. I'd like to improve Enroll Jeffco a little bit by putting up the school performance framework up on to match against the school when people are looking at those schools, so parents can evaluate how schools are doing and how they might meet their children's needs. But then I would also like to be having a robust conversation about transportation. And I think equity is a huge issue, and equity of access to schools, and transportation is a critical component of that access.
Is going to talk about equity.
I've been looking at this for a number of years, and I know that they've been looking at the Denver programs in Aurora and the neighboring districts on how those districts that are actually providing transportation we could replicate some of their processes or look to what their best practices are. So I'm hopeful and excited that that is on the table and the conversation is taking place. We also need drivers for those buses, and right now I don't know if you all have seen those articles, but it's made it all the way to Forbes where there's a shortage of drivers And so, what can we be doing differently? Are we allocating the financial resources we need to attract and keep and retain drivers? So that actually can drive the buses that we want them to drive our students.
Policy in ensuring that public charter schools receive 100% of the mill levy override, and would you continue that as a director?
All children that attend Jefferson County schools are Jefferson County students, and they all have the same value in terms of mill levy and dollars. Once again, it's a student-based budgeting and the dollars in the backpacks for our local schools, and then the dollars going over to our charter schools. And I would support it and continue to support the 100%. I would make a caveat that the money that is going over to the charter schools, 5% of it is coming back to the district. And the question is, what are the charter schools getting for that 5% that comes back to the district? So I would like to be thinking about, could we look to what Denver has done, where they actually have service agreements with their charter schools, and so the charter schools understand exactly what they are getting for the dollars that they are spending back to the districts. And I think that's transparency. I mean, that's financial transparency, which we all talk about, which charter schools are charged to be as transparent as possible, and I think we need to be the same at the district level, and the communication and the agreements between the two.
So I agree also. What occurs now needs to continue to happen with charter schools. I think sometimes people get not confused, or don't really understand how charter schools are governed. And so let's say there's something that the district is making sure all schools have in terms of school safety, maybe walkie-talkies or something like that. And that sometimes charter school parents are thinking that it's unfair that the district is not giving that school the same thing, but the issue is around what a charter school is, that it's governed within itself, and the decisions around the budget come from that board around how purchases are to be made. So I just think it's sometimes confusing.
Yes, I support what you said.
Great. Lightning round.
I too support that charter schools should get equal funding through the mill levy.
So what obligation does the district have to ensure that charter schools have access to those additional dollars and those additional resources to ensure school safety? Jeffco has made investments in school safety, rightfully so. What obligation do they have to ensure that charter schools receive those same dollars and those same resources?
They have the obligation to make sure that charter schools receive those dollars, and that the school safety is very similar to what the district does. But I guess the interesting piece I'm going to go back on is the way that charter schools are governed, and how part of what charter schools are is the fact that it is up to the board and parents at that school to make some decisions. However, since it is linked to the district, it is important that there are minimum or just requirements that need to occur around school safety at all schools within Jeffco, including charter schools.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the district has the responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of all students in the district. And if there are questions around responsibility for purchasing or for facilities care or for what waivers are in place, that needs to be a really transparent, to use Susan's word, conversation to make sure that the school community, that the district are aligned in understanding how to maintain the exact same standards for every single building and school in this district.
To be clear though, do you, as Joan mentioned, believe that the decision for which types of equipment, what specific things are purchased with those dollars, are made at the school level?
I think it needs to be made by the school in concert and in conversation with the district.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be helpful if those two entities are operating independently,
Okay.
conversationally speaking.
Rob or Susan?
I was gonna say, I mean, ultimately communication is the key when, especially around safety. You know, if there's an issue with any sort of, danger in the Jeffco system or in the community, every single school needs to know and needs to understand what the new policy is going to be or what the plan is going to be. So from the district, communication needs to be active and constant, out to say, here's what we're thinking, here's what we're doing, here's how it might affect you, and here's how much it might cost all of us, any of us, whoever decides.
Actually, the district is looking at changing its security communication systems and the radios that they're sharing with each of the schools. And there was a question as to why the charter schools were not initially in that first round of purchases of radios. And once again, I think it goes back to the communication component, and I believe John McDonald has corrected that challenge, and the schools do have access to the radios. And so I think that was a quick fix, a quick response, because the charters raised their hands and said, wait a minute, we need those radios as well, and we'll be happy to buy those radios, we just need to be on the list. And so I think the challenge has always been how the schools communicate with each other, charters and districts, and it's a constant process. We've had people join us. Allie and Amanda have always come to the JCSC meetings, which has been very helpful. We have a liaison, that Tim was once the liaison between the district and the charters, and that communication has to continue. And we have to be conscious that the safety component affects all neighborhoods, all schools. And that's the link that has to be kept tight.
District Accountability Committee, one of the subgroups that was there was around the charter application and making sure that the application, the language, the process, that was established in a clearer way, because I guess it had not previously been. And so we spent a lot of time looking through the language of that and the process and talking about how that would look. I think at the end of the day, we have a responsibility, the district has a responsibility to make sure that all students in whatever type of school they're going to are meeting certain metrics and measurements, which obviously there are certain students that are falling behind at this point, but that all of those standards should be set consistently. How schools get there and the instructional practices and the pedagogy that they use, I think that's something that, as long as it's within the charter and it makes sense to support that strategy, then that's something the district should take into account. I mean, the specifics around the details of that, I think that's a conversation that needs to happen to make sure that the best interest of our kids ultimately is the #1 priority and remains top line when any of these things are being talked about.
I'm going to echo what Stephanie said. I believe in the past, the path towards becoming approved as a charter school was sometimes not well spelled out. And I'm happy to say that there's really nicely written rubrics for those who are bringing charter schools forward to follow. I think there was one that kind of came forward last year, and they kind of looked at the rubrics and they needed to go back and make sure that it was going to be meeting all the rubrics at the top level, to make sure that the district would approve it, to make sure that it was the best possibility to educate the group of kids within that charter. So I think that's really important. I mean, obviously, there are some, federal and state laws that public school, well, Jefferson County neighborhood schools, as well as charter schools need to follow. Those are really important. But yet, we need to make sure that charter schools have that governance within the charter school itself, and that's kind of sometimes done by variances within the district, just to make sure that those schools are special. They're there for a reason, and they need to stay that way, so that parents who have helped to try to develop those schools feel satisfied with their result of the charter school itself.
Susan, how do you balance flexibility and autonomy?
Well, a charter school is started normally in the Jefferson County from the grassroots. Many of the charter schools that we know and love, families, teachers, community, said this is what we want for our children. And I think there's a balance, though, on the district side, where the district has to be held accountable to taxpayers, and they have to be saying that we are making wise choices and providing alternative opportunities for children where parents want them to learn. And so we have that process in place where charters can come forward or communities can come forward and apply for charter schools, and they can go through the approval process. And that in of itself is another topic. But once you finally are approved and you go forward, I think there is a check and balance that you do have to be able to say, are you continuing on the path that you said you were going to, that you promised your community you were going to do? Are you delivering what you said you were going to deliver? Is your governance in place so that you're meeting your financial fiduciary obligations, your facility needs, your classroom needs for your teachers? All of those are in that review process every 5 years. And I think charters, because they're aware of that, and we'll dance, because they're aware of that, I think there is an intensity and a intentionality of delivering the pedagogy, as Stephanie said, but the environment and the community that they have promised those families.
Yeah, sure. But I think there are lessons to be learned from Denver, from DPS. And it revolves around some things like administrative costs. I mean, there are several schools in Denver that have a charter school or a magnet within just a neighborhood school. Sometimes community members' parents don't think that's fair. And whether it's a true story or not, this is concerns. For an example, access to the library. There is a school in Denver, and it's been told to me that has a charter within it, and only the charter kids really get access to that library. So what it seems like, and again, I don't believe everything I hear all the time, but I think we just need to be really cognizant of that, cognizant of all the kids within that school space itself. We need to really study the fact that, you know, who's accessing the charter school, who's accessing that? Does it make sense to the neighborhood? Does it allow all kids within that to have the same kind of access to education? So while I think it could work well, I just think we need to be really careful of that. And certainly, unfortunately, we've had some schools close. And so, you know, I mean, charter schools certainly would have the opportunity, I'm not saying I love it, but would have the opportunity to kind of think about using some of the closed schools as a possibility.
Okay. Susan or Stephanie?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to this question, but what I do know is that what should be looked at is what is the need, what are the group of students and parents that are coming together to have some sort of facility need that is addressed, and then look creatively with a bunch of people at the table to figure out what's best for the kids, because ultimately they need facilities, our neighborhood schools need improvements, there are a bunch of facilities needs in this district, and I'm not sure that we've brought together the sort of infinite possibility of people that could be at the table together to think a little bit more creatively about how we currently sort of purpose and or repurpose the facilities that exist in this district. It's a large district, and I think that there are opportunities that we may not be taking advantage of yet.
I sit on a charter school board, and I've also worked with charter schools trying to find facilities. We know how challenging that can be in very dynamic economies. And I think when we are talking about facilities, we need to also go back to what is demand? You know, what is the actual demand? Are we talking 50 students? Are we talking 100 students? Are we talking 150 students? What is that enrollment actually looking like? And when we sat on the choice committee, we looked down on Jefferson County where, you know, we have, Jefferson County, or Jefferson Academy up here, we have D'Evelyn down in the south, we have classicals split, we have Montessori's down in the south, not in the north, and when we were looking down on it, we were talking about how do we afford people choices in different parts of Jefferson County. And so I do believe that as we start to potentially look at schools, the enrollments are dropping, neighborhoods, maybe you don't have as many children in a neighborhood because people are not moving out, but you could have that neighborhood thrive again, bring children back into that neighborhood by potentially, if a school, for example, Montessori needs to be placed up north, would that facility be available? if there is the consideration of closing a school. And I'm not saying which ones are, because I don't know that, any of that, but I'm just thinking, how do we keep communities thriving as well as options available for parents?
I'm just thinking through online opportunities. I know that there are GT options available now that have just started. I hope I'm right, Susan.
Yeah, you are.
Just started for middle school kids, and I think that's the kind of thing that's really important, to be able to make sure that all students have an opportunity to have an equitable education. So I think that's one of the things that could really help. I think it's important also that schools, bigger high schools, are available to offer classes to kids that maybe are at a smaller school or a charter school, small charter school. They may not have the same programs there. Somebody that I know, she's a physician now, but she was a Jeffco Open kid from preschool to high school, where when she needed to go to get the higher math, she went to Lakewood, and Lakewood was available for her to go. So I think that those kind of opportunities and having those bigger schools that have that program available is important. I think that happens a lot already with athletics sometimes, like the kids, our homeschooled kids, but also with the open school kids, that they sometimes did athletics at other venues. It just needs to be talked about, and parents need to know those options exist.
I would like to chime in on that one. I really believe that when we are looking at schools, and we have some schools that have chronically underperformed, and we have not done great things for those children, and we haven't honored those families. And I think we could be talking a little bit more about what alternatives are there. Could we be talking more about innovation schools? When I look to Denver, the innovation schools in the elementary level are doing much better, just because the ability to change the climate, the environment, to get people to buy into potentially different alternative ways of providing access to kids earlier in the day and staying till later in the evening. Those are options that we consider for innovation schools, and certainly those are waivers that public schools would have to ask for, and just like charters have waivers, public schools can ask for waivers as well. And so I really think we need to be thinking outside of the box, and I think we need to be thinking about what is best for our community and how can we use the parameters that are set up under our legal public system that can actually benefit kids. We don't all have to be charters. We don't have to all be starting all new things. We can be thinking about what can be happening in our communities now, and how can we really make a difference for our children that are most impacted.
Innovations happen at low-performing schools every day.
I'm talking about an actual innovation school, where you
Right.
actually have the community vote to take it as an innovation school.
I
and that changes.
understand that.
Yeah, okay.
But I do need to say, innovations happen all the time. The urgency is there. We're doing right by kids. And I really have hurt feelings when I hear the implication is that principals and teachers at underperforming schools are not doing everything they can. Let me give you an example. Mulholland had, for 3 years, a $1 million grant from Nabisco to help our kids, to help with staffing, to help with extra field trips. Then we were a Success for All school for about 10 years. So there's always innovation going. We're never happy with the outcomes. We know we're trying to really meet the needs of the whole child. We have kids who are immigrant kids. We have kids who have faced trauma. We have kids probably at a higher homeless rate than kids. So I think we need to acknowledge the work that's being done at schools that are underperforming.
Thank you, Jeff.
I think too that two things. One is to really look at the landscape of need and demand that's in the district. And so rather than talking just about one type of school or one type.
All of us have done numerous surveys about how our schools are communicating with us. And I know when we've received our surveys back from our parents, the question is always, well, you can communicate so much better. And you think about, well, let's see, we've tweeted, we've put stuff up on Facebook, we've sent direct mailings, we've sent you an email, we've asked you to opt into our news space. I mean, you know, how many different ways do you communicate with your families? And then when something happens like you know, I'll make something up for the moment, the art kiln goes down in one of the buildings or one of your art classroom, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing that has ever happened, and all the families come in, and there's, you know, there's the conversations about why did that happen, so when there's noise, when people are upset, there's noise. And when there's not noise, normally they say, well, you aren't communicating with us as well as we'd like to communicate. So I think it really gets down to what are the best ways to be holding town halls on weekends when people can come and actually be there. It's really hard when somebody calls you and says, hey, can you come to a board meeting at 11 o'clock in the morning and be present? We work, we can't necessarily get there. So I think you have to figure out the times and locations where your community is. Do we go to the rec centers and talk to those people that are 70% of them are not in our communities, in our schools? That's where we have to be. We have to go to the communities and go out into the communities and solicit information and solicit their opinions and solicit their dreams and their aspirations and their concerns. We have to go to them.
Manages their higher level governance over the charter schools.
I'll take that one. Yeah.
Okay.
I think the governance model is you have the district, which is the authorizer of your charter, for most charters that are within the district. There is communication between the, what they call the superintendent for charter schools. I think that's their name. Tim, what's the?
Community superintendent.
Community superintendent, thank you. Community superintendent that you have who is aligned or talks with all of the charter schools, has contact directly in with the principals and with the business directors, et cetera. But really the relationship is between the district board and the charter school boards. Those are the ones that are accountable to each other. And so those are where conversations, I think, could be more robust. I think there could be more conversations taking place between the board members or the board, district board and charter boards. And I don't know how exactly that could be happening. Could it be quarterly where you could actually have, you know, boards come together by various districts or various areas within Jefferson County? But I think communication between boards is critical. It was great to have the community soup to talk with, come and talk to the JCSC or go and talk with different principals and help in that manner, but I really think it's a board to board. That's really how it's supposed to be set up, and that's how the governance model, I believe, should be working.
There's nothing specific that I know enough about to be able to say this is exactly what I would change, because I think that that needs to be a conversation that happens where, whether it's parents coming forward and saying, we don't appreciate or like what's happening, or as Susan was mentioning, board-to-board conversations around the structure of how that relationship works. Again, I feel like a lot of these conversations need to be bigger conversations, and whether that leads to structural change in the governance of charter schools, I think that that is something that would have to reveal itself through that kind of dialogue.
There's another hand up.
Do you think they should also have to go before the school board to be held accountable, just like charter school?
Say that again?
Do you think neighborhood schools, low-performing neighborhood schools, should have to go before the board to be held accountable like charter schools, regardless of charter school performance? They still have to go before the board every 5 years to be held accountable to their performance and what they're doing, what they're teaching and so forth, to make sure they're obligating their contract. But do you think district-run schools should also have to do that?
Should district-run schools have to do
So I don't know if it needs to be in the same format as charter schools, but they are very much held accountable through school improvement plans by the state of Colorado, whether you're meeting those, and then there's consequences if that doesn't happen. So there are reports to the district around how well your school is doing, and the consequences of that not occurring could result in things like the school closing, being reformed, and that is what happened at Wheat Ridge Middle School. So we were within, I think, a 3-year period to move our kids forward. And if those goals aren't met, then there's consequences around that. So I would say that the schools that are the low-performing schools don't just get a ride. There's consequences. What happened with Wheat Ridge Middle is it closed, became then a 5-8, which closed, and there's no more Wheat Ridge Middle School anymore. And so that I believe that there's accountability within the system for low-performing schools.
Anybody else?
You know, that is something that I really, we asked that a couple years ago, talking to different board members about whether or not it was fair to be asking schools every 5 years to come forward if they're performing, if they're showing that they have their growth and they're meeting their targets and they're on board, but you know, they still had to come before the district. And I frankly, I don't see why we would not want all schools to be actually looked at, you know, maybe on a rotation basis. And are we getting the growth that we need to be getting? Are we seeing the schools actually getting a full year's growth for all children? You know, why would we not want to constantly be a learning environment and finding best practices and realizing that maybe we can percolate some of those best practices to other schools? And I think the only way we do that is by actually looking at each individual school, and there's 155 of them, and you can be on a rotation every 5 years like everybody else is, and you know, that might take a little bit of extra effort, and I'm sure we could talk about, you know, how that could work, but I think all schools should absolutely be looked at, and leadership should be raised up. What great work they're doing. How do we transfer those great leadership skills and opportunities to other schools? So I think we should be a constant learning environment. That's what education is about, and I think we should be those learning environments as well across the district.
I agree that there are measures in place that hold all schools accountable to one level or another, and whether that is through the leadership of the school or measures from the state, that those are in place. Now, are they sufficient for any of our schools to get to the real measure of student success and student growth? That is a different question, and I think it actually may be one that would be important to explore. What are the ways in which we are determining whether our students are succeeding? There are the statewide tests that are important. They are also one measure at one point in time for our students. And there are a lot of other skills that I think are extremely imperative that we try to measure for our students. So things like critical thinking skills, things like being able to collaborate with others, being able to work across difference. These are all skills that are sort of embedded in the JCSC Generations Plan and are also extremely important as our students are trying to be agile and moving into workforce and college and community experiences that are as yet unknown and undetermined. So when we talk about school performance, I think that we may need to have a broadened conversation around what does a successful school look like? What does a successful student look like? Who are we wanting to graduate from our schools? And think in a more innovative way, in a maybe less traditional way about what that looks like.
I think it's a very interesting question, and you know, it's coming from the charter school side. It seems like it's about fairness. You know, why do we have to go through these extra hoops when they don't have to? So you know, and I don't have a good answer for that. You know, but when charter schools come up for review. Oh, sorry. Okay. You know, they're looking at budgets. They're looking at how you're spending the money. Are we doing that at each one of our district schools as well? You know, I know there's checks and balances for school performances for district schools, as they have talked about, and we should hold every school to a high standard. So yeah, I mean, that's reviewing district schools periodically. You know.